It has been estimated by 19th century military men that the entire fort would have held 60,000 men at arms, their wives, children, and belongings. If its commander had somewhat less forces, he could withdraw to whatever he could defend. Now back to the middle fort. We will cover both the east and west walls as we go. The west wall is approximately 10 foot in height and runs south in a somewhat straight course. The east wall is very jagged because of ravines that intersect, and it averages 7 to 8 feet in height. We now approach the crescent gateway. This is formed by two crescent-shaped walls that guard the north end of the middle fort. From here we look south and see the great gateway and the width of the fort at the gateway, which is not over 200 feet. This gateway guards the north end of the old or south fort. Its walls are over 16 feet high and very abrupt. The steepness of the ravines to the east and west side provide added protection. After entering the south fort, we look back at the opening and notice that the east wall curves to the east and then south in a semicircle. Looking down over the wall in this area, we see terraces where innumerable human remains were uncovered. They were buried side by side and covered by a shallow covering of earth and stones. The east wall continues in a southerly direction, zigzagging on its way with openings or broken spaces. We turn inside and view the open area where the cemetery, the largest burying ground of the fort's people, lay. Within a radius of 100 feet in all directions, some 300 graves were found, and over 1,000 wagon loads of stones were removed therefrom. The graves were an average of 2 feet deep and were formed of limestones which were plentiful in the ravines and river below. The stones were arranged around the sides, head, and feet, and over the remains of the bodies, which crumbled to dust upon being exposed. The skeletons showed little or no difference in size and form from the modern conventional skeleton. We now look at the most southern point of the fort. Over this wall lies a terrace where more graves were discovered. They were similar in construction and content to those in the main cemetery. From this point, the wall runs northwest through two large ravines where water is cut through the wall. We move on towards the western wall of this south fort and come to a moat from which the earth was taken to build the wall at this point. This moat has standing water in it after storms or during spring melt. Over this wall are 3 terraces, all containing graves and some grouped tombs, one of which contained 20 bodies and over 100 wagon loads of stone. From this overlooked point, we look out on the scene to the west. If the trees around this fort were removed, as they must have been at the time of its use, one could see an advancing enemy a long way off. We now travel the west wall on its weaving course back towards the great gateway. As we approach the gateway, we come upon a mound whereby were found piles of stones, and between the mound and the wall of the gateway, human bones in vast quantities were found a few inches below the surface soil, indicating that a severe battle may have taken place. As we return back through the middle fort, we look through the trees at the west wall. We now move along that wall, traveling north towards the northwest entrance of the north or new fort. Along here we view the top of the brush and tree-covered wall as it curves along its way. Finally, we approach and come to the entrance by which we first entered the fort and began our pictorial study. As you have witnessed, Fort Ancient is a marvelous work of defense. Early in our study of Fort Ancient, we spoke of the many openings in the wall, of which there are 70. Thomas J. Brown, editor of the Miami Gazette, after a 50-year study of Fort Ancient in 1908, stated, "In reading descriptions of Fort Ancient, we notice constant allusion to its numerous gateways, and these are generally coupled with expression of wonder that there should be so many. Now I have made these gateways my special study during my whole acquaintance with it, and long ago concluded that there are but about 5 bona fide gateways, the rest being intended rather for points of defense than for places of ingress and egress. I consider it necessary to conclude that each of these gaps was occupied with a blockhouse, reaching out beyond the wall, forming a bastion from which defenders could enfilade the outside of the ramparts most effectually. The distance of these gaps apart is in no case too great to serve this purpose, and if we consider it in this way, the whole outside of the walls could be defended with very little exposure on the part of the defenders." Now for our own statement. Many of the hilltop forts which we, the authors, have studied in our search for the materials for this video have these same style openings in their walls. The last earthworks in our pictorial study is named Mound City. It lies in Ross County, Ohio, just 3 miles north of Chillicothe. It has earthen walls as though it was a city, but if it was changed into a burial area. It encloses 13 acres and lies next to the Scioto River. Within that 13 acres are 24 mounds. The principal ones were found to contain altars and other remains, the largest mound being 17 feet high and nearly 100 feet in diameter at its base. There is a long mound near its center that is 140 feet in length by 80 feet in width at its base and averages 10 feet in height. Outside of the walls of the enclosure were deep pits from which came the earth to build the walls and mounds. 1/4 of a mile to the northwest of this work was a small circle of 250 feet in diameter with a moat on the inside and only one opening. It was accompanied by 2 large mounds. About the same distance to the south was a larger circular work with a moat on the outside of the walls. It enclosed 28 acres, had 6 openings, and 1 large mound in its center. The Ohio and Erie Canal, with its accompanying road, had cut through this work prior to survey in 1848. Today it does not exist. Let us now discuss the mounds and bone pits found near the fortified hills around and near Cumorah. In his book Aboriginal Monuments of New York, Professor E.G. Squire speaks of human bones of both sexes, of children and infants thrown together. Many skulls were fractured as if by a blow from a hatchet or club. This was the scene of one of those indiscriminate massacres so common in the history of savage warfare. From O. Turner's pioneer history of the Holland Purchase of western New York we read, "Uprooted trees of the forest or of the growth of many centuries exposed their moldering remains. The uncovered mounds with masses of their skeletons promiscuously heaped, one on top of the other, as if they were gathered and hurriedly entombed dead of well-contested battlefields. In our villages, upon our hillsides, the plow and the spade discovered their rude implements adapted to war, the chase, and domestic use. All these unintelligible witnesses bringing but unsatisfactory knowledges of races that have preceded us." Quoting again from E.G. Squire, "Human bones have been discovered beneath the buildup of accumulated debris, and in nearly every part of the trench, skeletons of adults of both sexes, of children and infants, have been found.